welcome back to the White Coat Club. This is Lindsay, and I'm one of the counselors at Moon Prep. And today I've got Nicole and Michaela with me as well. And then we've got a first-time guest too, named Erin. And we're all going to be discussing essay brainstorming, kind of the who, what, when, where, why, and hows of essay brainstorming. Now, don't forget to like and subscribe to get more BSMD and med school admissions advice. So before we dive into the content, Erin, do you mind introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about your background?
Sure. Yeah. Super excited to be on here with you guys. So my name's Erin. Like Lindsay said, I am a counselor here at Moon Prep, and um, I kind of joke that by day I am an English professor. So I worked in higher ed teaching English for 13 years now. So I love everything in the essay writing process, like from brainstorming and really like cultivating your personal voice as a writer and helping you showcase the things that are, special about you. So, this type of discussion is right in my wheelhouse and the stuff that I love to talk about. So glad to be here.
And my name is
Perfect.
Michaela. I decided to join this one too. I used to be an admissions counselor at a big state university. So I used to see a bunch of these personal statements all day, every day at my previous job before coming to Moon Prep.
Perfect. All right. So Nicole, kick us off. What is the personal statement?
So the personal statement is the essay that is going to be attached to the common application most commonly. So it's just a 650 word. You have a variety of statements that you can choose from, or topics that you can choose from. There's 7 different prompts that you're offered. There's also a prompt that you can kind of just get creative and make your own, but it's a basic 650 word essay about you and a little bit kind of introducing you and your application to the admissions team.
Perfect. Michaela, can you tell us who gets the personal statement?
Absolutely. So we kind of have a whole presentation we go through with students when they are a Moon Prep student. And this is one of the slides on that presentation is who gets this. And so this personal statement is basically the essay that goes to every school on your list. So every school will have their own supplemental essays as well that ask questions that they want to know, like what's the time you showed leadership or what's an obstacle that you faced. But the personal statement has to be a little bit more broad and appeal to kind of every college on your list. So every school will see this, whether it's UPitt or UT Austin or Vanderbilt, they'll all see the same essay because it comes in through the Common App or the Coalition app, whatever platform you're using. And the personal statement is kind of the blanket term, no matter what application platform you're using. It's all the same.
Now, Erin, what's your advice on when should students start writing the personal statement?
Yeah, great question. I would start as soon as you can. The sooner the better. You want to get your personal statement done and polished, and you feel really confident about it. I would recommend, like I said earlier, the better. So starting in the early part of the summer, because towards the later end of the summer, you're going to be looking at additional supplementals and planning your college list and all of that. So I would recommend getting started May or June, going into the summer before your senior year.
And of course, if you're listening to this right now and planning to apply to colleges this year, no matter what day it is, no matter what month it is, if it's after the summer, now is the perfect time to get started. Don't waste any more time thinking about it. Just like, well, of course, spend time thinking about it, but you should really start to write your personal statement. You will probably go through more drafts than you might think. A great personal statement definitely isn't like born overnight, unfortunately. So kind of thinking about it and taking time to get some drafts, maybe get a second opinion on it can really help you.
Yeah, I've sort of never seen a student get through from start to finish the personal statement in less than 2 weeks. Usually it's 2 or 3 weeks. Again, it's a big essay. Every school will see it, so it's good to spend some time on it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Take time. You don't want to be doing it if your first deadline's 11, like November 1st, you definitely don't want to start it on Halloween for multiple reasons, but mostly because it'll be pretty obvious, I think, to colleges that you kind of slap something together. So pay attention to your deadlines. If you've got a lot of November 1st deadlines, it definitely is something you should have started over the summer. And then if you're mostly applying like regular decision to schools, your timeline might be a little bit pushed back, but you should definitely still have started on it. Okay, so the big question probably for a lot of people is like how to actually write the personal statement. So like, let's start from the beginning. Michaela, tell us a little bit about some of your brainstorming techniques with students.
Absolutely. So I really like essays. I think we all have our own like flavor or style to them, I think. And that's, pretty common since it's a creative process. And so I really like essays that really let us get to know the student, almost like the student is bringing us into their world and that we are almost like brought into like their secret language. If they have like a secret language with their parents or something, like almost like sharing secrets a little bit with the reader. And so one of the things that I do is I ask the student in the very beginning, I pull up an essay, an example essay, which we always share a bunch of sample essays with students to read beforehand. And I'll show them a demonstration of this one essay that's like, I think it's like spicy food aficionado. It's like this essay about that. And then I ask them about one of their favorite foods, and I almost give them a demonstration of what their favorite food could fit into this formula of the essay that I'm sharing, and kind of ask them their favorite food, but then kind of do it for them and show them how it works in action. And then I go to our brainstorming sheet and I start asking them, what is the thing, what's the topic that if I sat down with your 5 best friends for lunch and you got up to go get a drink from the vending machine, and then your friends were like, oh, make sure you don't mention this to him or her, you'll never get them to shut up if you bring up this. What's that topic? What are you an expert in? And the more niche, the better. But just trying to like get to what are they passionate about? Because of course, the activities list, their resume is going to show schools what they've done, but the personal statement is to be showing the schools who you are. And I think if you can write about something passionate, that is a great way to, really showcase your personality. This essay is supposed to be very personality driven, so they feel like they got to meet you. And I think talking about something that you are an expert in, or that this is what you spend all of your time doing, really shows them that. I'll also ask them questions like, if you and I were, ski on a ski trip and there was an avalanche and we got stuck in like a log cabin for a day until we got rescued, but it was just like we're stuck together for 12 hours. What would it be weird if I didn't find out about you? If we're just talking, what are some major things about you that it would feel weird if I didn't walk out of there knowing? And that usually peels back some layers too. So I'm asking them what they're experts in, what's something they're really passionate about that they could talk about for days and never shut up about it. And also what are major moments in their life. And then, we just kind of go from there and ask more questions, dig deeper along the way.
Perfect. Erin, I know that Michaela definitely gave a lot of information, but is there something that you always do with your students to help them brainstorm?
Yeah, Michaela brought up some, excellent points. Those are all like top quality suggestions and approaches. Just sometimes if a student is having a hard time coming up with something, a tip there, like a trick that I sometimes use is I ask them like what the algorithm is showing them. If they're like on social media, like what kind of videos pop up on your feed, you search for one type of video one time, or you like one type of video and it'll show that to you. And Michaela, I think a student that we shared a while back had, he said he got videos about like bears and car races. And so that was a funny one. So I think like just asking that sometimes, or what would you put as your 4 points in your social media bio. Sometimes that kind of helps them at least get started thinking in that direction of what makes you unique in you. So if they're struggling, sometimes I'll go that route, and it'll kind of help cultivate some conversations there.
I love that idea. I might steal that.
Yeah, right. I think
I've
that's
seen
really
it in
funny.
action, and it's really cool what it comes up with. It's really
Yeah,
fun.
they're like, oh, I didn't think about that, and because everybody's is tailored a little differently, whether you want it to be or not. So it helps them think about personal things that are outside of their, which I think is helpful sometimes.
And I think another go-to that a lot of people use, you're going to see this advice everywhere on the internet. So this is nothing new, but you can also kind of go through and outline answer the Common App prompts. It'll ask them, what's a time that you overcame a challenge or something. And so sometimes just answering those questions that are set out can lead you to the answer. I'm going to be honest though, I feel like almost all of my students, when we find their answer, it is not in answering those Common App prompts. Like, it's in something else that we've uncovered through the other questions that we ask on our brainstorming sheet. And so if you are out there doing this on your own, definitely try to go beyond just answering those prompts, because I think literally only 1 or 2 students of mine every year actually think up their answer just from doing that part of the exercise.
It is nice to be able to see like reoccurring themes for sure whenever they do that part, because then we're like, okay, we see that XYZ activity is like obviously like reoccurring and really important to you. So like it just makes it very obvious. And so maybe it's not necessarily the answer that they've said for the prompt, but it's nice to be able to see those patterns. Yeah, I always tell kids like don't get fixated on one prompt too early, because honestly, a lot of the times I feel like kids are hodgepodging together a lot of different prompts because there is a lot of overlap in them anyway. And so by being able to kind of have that flexibility, I think that it's a lot better.
I used to do that
Nicole is,
activity
oh,
with juniors. If we're talking right now and you're in senior year, it might be a little bit too, you might just kind of want to dial in and start writing and skip this. It's a little bit longer of a brainstorm, but similar to Michaela, I used to have my 11th graders or some 11th graders that want to get started early. I'd give them homework assignments and we'll pick Common App prompt number 1. I need 1 paragraph of you answering this prompt and give me a paragraph of what you would say. And then next one, we would do Common App prompt number 2, pretend that you're in English class and you have to write a paragraph about this. What would you write about? And then we'll do all of them and come together and say, okay, what themes, just like Lindsay was saying, like, did this come up multiple times, or like what themes are we seeing throughout? Do you want to combine things? And that's sometimes an easy way to decide which prompt is best or which story is best.
I really
I
love
have
that
to
idea.
say.
I think I have more underclassmen this year now, or kind of moving forward. And this year alone, I had many of my, like really half of my rising seniors, becoming seniors, start brainstorming and talking about essays as early as February. And all of the ones that I started that conversation with earlier, they're done, they're with their personal statement, they're moving on, they're really happy with what they have. They don't feel rushed. And I think it's a practice I'm going to do moving forward. So that's a fantastic idea, Nicole.
So that's like, I think a good point to bring up too is like February of like your junior years, kind of the timeline you were saying was good. Like to get started, is there like an earlier point? Because some people might be like, well, if February was great, then like maybe starting in February, my like sophomore year is even better, and getting it done that early. Do you think that there's a too early to start your essays?
I think I want my students to have had some life experience. So I guess I have, in like the beginning of junior year, shared some of the essay prompts with students so they know way in advance what they're going to be writing later, and almost like they can have it in the back of their mind as they move through activities, but I also don't want to do it too young where they're gonna forget about that or something. I think I want to develop maybe just here are some top 5 essay questions you're going to be asked later and maybe share at the end of sophomore year or something. But I think maybe looking at it too early, I don't know. I don't necessarily know if I see a big pro to that, like before junior year, but maybe I'm missing something.
No, I'd agree. I usually think like the summer of your junior year does tend to be like pretty influential, like the between sophomore junior year. Kids might be doing like more hands-on opportunities or, getting some like really cool like opportunities too that might like be influencing like how they perceive the world or like, they might be going to a summer camp, like a sleepaway summer camp for the first time and, having that eye-opening experience and developing like maturity and leadership skills. So yeah, I think early cannot be super helpful just because the kid is definitely still developing. Okay, how about some of the do's and don'ts of brainstorming? Do you have any like big things that you try and tell students to avoid? I'll throw it to you first, Erin.
Sure, yeah. So while there's like a wealth of things that you can talk about, there are definitely some things that we recommend avoiding or not including in your personal statement. And kind of the first thing that comes to mind is quotes or song lyrics. And that always runs a big temptation, that you hear this great quote or this song lyric really speaks to you and you want to incorporate it into your personal statement. But um, the in particular, starting off your personal statement with something like that, something I always share with my students is, the first thing that admissions people are reading are words that aren't yours. So it's like they're getting, a line or something from somebody that's not even you. And it's actually, using song lyrics or quotes is something that a lot of people do. And so kind of twofold, we don't want to continue doing things that a bunch of people are already doing, but also like we want them to get to know you first and foremost, not, piggybacking on the words of someone else. So while it is a temptation, that is something that we typically recommend to stay away from is song lyrics or quotes from other people. So yeah.
What about you, Michaela? Do you have any like things you try and get kids to avoid?
Oh, I have so much to talk about here. So, just tell me to stop when it gets too long, but I could talk to you about this for days. This could be my personal statement. So one thing is I think it's really important to kind of think about who's going to be reading this. And your admissions counselors, especially if it's a bigger school, are just going to be reading tons of these. And so it's almost a good idea to think about what are your friends going to be talking about? If all 10 of your best friends are applying to the same school, what would they be writing about? If they're all going to be writing about choir, okay, maybe choose something different. And so I think my do would be to really try to find something unique because there's so many essays coming from high school students that there's only so many essays they can read about robotics club or choir or dance. I mean, like, things that the majority of people are going to be writing about, just picking something different and just totally unique only to you that isn't a shared experience already sets you apart. Another don't that I have would be to just try to like, don't go too negative. Try not to almost like, I think you get a lot of advice sometimes that this is supposed to be a time where you show how you overcame an obstacle. And some students take that as, I'm just going to trauma dump everything bad that's ever happened in my life, all the things I've had to overcome. But then there's almost no uplift at the end of how you actually overcame it. It's like, I survived these 5 terrible things. And I think it's just, again, keeping in perspective of the admissions counselors. If you know that a lot of other students do that, then you you know, like they're probably going to be reading 20 really negative, you know, like my family lost our house, I mean, like it can be very negative, you know, on the admissions counselor's mind. So even just staying positive and picking something different, even if you did overcome something large, just like choosing not to focus only on that already also sets you apart. That doesn't mean you can't mention things, but I think it's just very easy to have, these are all the things that I've overcome in my life, and just it feels like a lot in the essay, and
I
there's a
think
lot of
that's
people doing it.
And I think that's why it's like so important to do multiple drafts, because I've noticed that with like students as well, if they are talking about like a challenge that they've overcome in the first draft, it's like 80% about the challenge or like even more about the challenge. And then like a tiny little percentage is about like the growth that you had after the challenge or like what you learned from the challenge or things like that. But that's like the much more important part. You know, talking about growth, talking about like the positive things that came out of the challenge. So that's something I've noticed with first drafts is they tend to focus more on the negative. And then later on we get like more of the positive in there. So that's yet another reason why don't put off writing your personal statement to last minute um, because you need time to go through these drafts. Anything that you try and get students to avoid, Nicole?
I really like what Erin said about, don't start it with someone else's words. I've definitely wanted students to avoid that type of style, but I like the way that you worded that. Like that you don't want the very first thing that they see. There's definitely some stories that I feel like are kind of overdone. I don't necessarily love like a comeback story. Um, I feel like I see a lot of them, whether it be athletes or whether it be like where we're talking about grades or courses. And it might just be my style. I think sometimes they can be done really nicely, but overall, that's one that I usually never want to talk about or stray students away from.
I think a
But
big a big
yeah.
another one to avoid too is like having it be about someone else. Um,
Mhm.
I've watched Gilmore Girls for the first time recently, and like, you know, in the show, the girl is applying to colleges, and she's like, "Oh, I know exactly what my topic is going to be on. It's going to be Hillary Clinton." And as I'm like listening to this, I was like, "Oh, that's an interesting choice. I feel like that's a terrible idea, but okay." And she goes to like a personal statement kind of like webinar or something, not a webinar, but like a talk about it. And they're like, we do not want to read any more essays about Hillary Clinton. Like, that's a terrible idea because ultimately they're not accepting Hillary Clinton, they're accepting you. So kind of think the same thing, like Taylor Swift. I'm assuming they probably get so many essays about Taylor Swift and about like, what her lyrics mean to you or something like that. But if 50 other people are writing the exact same thing, exactly kind of what Nicole was talking about, like what makes your experiences unique, what makes it different. So that'd be like the main thing I'd always think about is like, okay, what about tennis? What about my like quiz bowl experience is so important that I need them to know about it and like what does it ultimately tell about me and like what makes it different from the other like 10 to 20 to 30 quiz bowl or tennis, whatever it might be, essays that they've read recently. So think about that as you kind of are brainstorming too. And I think one last important thing to mention as well is just because like we mentioned, oh, you should not be talking about, you know, these certain topics or try to avoid them. That's like kind of general advice. There's never any universal truths for college admissions really in general. And so especially when it comes to like personal statement writing. So ultimately, trust your gut, maybe seek a second opinion to see what other people say as well. But just because it's like on the avoid list doesn't mean that it couldn't be a great essay potentially. And I guess we already kind of covered this, but Michaela, do you want to talk about why we write personal statements?
Yes, so I think this is where you might get a lot of different opinions, but a lot of people think that the personal statement is there to where you should be talking about your resume or a part-time job, or this is where you have to talk about your musical talent and things like that. I think a lot of parents get this advice from other parents. Maybe it did work out for a parent's child, a friend's child or something like that, but you don't know the other components that were in their application either. And so the best essays from when I was reading them, and many different, I mean, I was definitely, when I went to conferences and everything, connected with many other admissions counselors at other schools, other colleges, and the shared advice was the best personal statements are when we simply felt like we got to know the student. And so this essay is meant to showcase your personality, showcase the qualities that you want to show to a college, that you feel like your application be incomplete without them knowing this about you. It helps the colleges see what type of person that they are inviting to campus. And, you know, it's truthfully the feeling of, do I like this student enough for them to come and maybe sit next to me in a classroom? And so essentially you should pick a story that just lets them get a feel of who you are. And then by the end of the essay, it should just feel like the admissions counselor shook your hand and got an impression of you. And I think that's what the best personal statements truly bring to the table.
Yeah, ultimately we want to be able to envision who you are on campus. So think about those qualities that you're showcasing. And ultimately, these admissions readers and officers don't necessarily have a ton of time to spend on each application. So you do want it to be something that is worth their while to read ultimately, that it adds that value to your application and really showcases who you are. Nicole, I'm totally putting you on the spot. Do you have like a favorite personal statement, like essay that you've ever read that maybe like the topic was untraditional or that was pretty traditional, but they did it in a really unique way that you'd want to share?
Michaela, I thought about the essay with the like sound effects in the beginning, you know, where he was like writing like the sound of the blade like running across his head as his like hair fell down into like the like wet tile, like when he was getting his head shaved at that ceremony. It like lives rent free in my head, honestly, because like I feel like
It was so good.
It was so good, but it was really like risky, you know. And we told him that we were like, you can either go with a risky approach or you can pick something that's a little more safe. And both options were really good, but ultimately he chose this one that was like a little like a more untraditional approach, and it was so well done. And I feel like those types of essays that, you know, like live rent free in your head is actually a success. You know, like that's what you want, is for that to kind of sit in the back of your admissions reader's mind, like, oh wow, that was really good. So, and it's been months and many essays since then, but I don't know, that one always sticks out to me.
One of my favorite essays that I read last year was the squirrel essay. So it's about this girl who had a peach tree in her backyard, and this like squirrel kept eating all her peaches. And it obviously doesn't really have anything to do with her extracurriculars, which I think can be really effective. And obviously some kids will do theirs about extracurriculars, which is totally fine too. But hers really focused kind of on her like almost like quote unquote battle with this squirrel. And so it had a lot of humor in it. It showed like a lot of her like problem solving techniques and kind of like the systematic way she tackles problems. So it was like really well done because she kind of like went through multiple steps to try and like almost like outsmart this squirrel. And at the end, they like learn how to coexist. But I thought it was like a really cute, once again, kind of like a risky story too, because I'm sure like when her parents read it, they're like, well, this has nothing to do with like your extracurriculars and like all these things you spend a ton of time doing. But it was like a really like memorable, like well done essay too that showed us who she's going to be on campus, which I think is ultimately what we're looking for.
I had a student 2 years ago who wrote about their family car, and basically it was the car that brought her home from the hospital that then she later learned to drive in, and the car accompanied her family through 4 separate moves across the country for her dad's job. And she just kind of talked about herself in relation to the car, you know, the different roles the car held for her, that she learned a love of community service and different places in her community that she could go and get involved through the car's radio, how the backseat of the car allowed her to kind of embrace her inner creative spirit because she was coloring and painting in the back seat, and just kind of all these lessons that she learned while the car kind of deteriorated in age and everything. And then it ended with her being like, I'm going to take all these lessons I've learned with me to my next move, which will be in college. And even though the car isn't coming with me this time, I'm like ready for all the challenges, the hills ahead of me because of what this car taught me. And it was just a really well done essay. You feel like you kind of got to know her throughout her entire lifetime, even though it was, in a short amount of words, and you really got a sense of her personality. And it was just probably one of the best personal statements I've seen ever.
I like that idea. Similar to the one that I'm thinking about. This student grew up having a nanny. It was just her entire life. Her parents both worked, full-time jobs, and she had nannies, but it was various different nannies like as her life went on. So she started off in the middle of a story and she's in an elevator, which is really cool. So we're like, she's counting down, and then we jump into a story of the first nanny when she was little, taught her these things and the lessons that she learned. And then, moving forward, then she had this one, and, this person took her to the park and they did all these things, and just kind of like having these other figures, parental type figures in her life. And throughout moves and all these things, it was kind of a constant that she would have like a third kind of parental figure around. And I just really liked it. It was interesting. I really hadn't heard any stories of anyone talking about something like that. So I did like that one a lot.
Love it. And I feel like some kids might be scared about talking about that too, because they would think that maybe it would come across as like being like privileged or something like that, or like their
Mhm.
parents were like out of touch or something. But I think that it's all about like tone of how you handle these types of essays. And so
Yeah.
that's another reason why like that second opinion and taking time to review the personal statement can be so helpful to make sure tone is is correct and like ultimately showcasing who you are most
Yeah.
effectively.
And she kind of talks about like, the first one was very strict. So it taught her and her sisters to like really abide by rules and like hold hands on the sidewalk and like, make sure that we're at the bus stop on time for school and things like that. And just kind of like these bigger life lessons that, you know, her parents didn't give her because her parents weren't home, but she was able to get from these other people. Um, but I totally agree. Like it could be maybe written in the wrong sense or have the wrong idea behind it, but I think every topic can work if it's written the right way.
Hmm.
It's when we talk about like things to avoid and topics to avoid. If this is your story and this is, something that has a huge impact on your life, I always would, you should write about it, even if it's on that kind of maybe don't do list, but it's more of like how you're shaping it.
Yeah, I really like that. Like that any topic can work just if it's written right. So that's cool.
Anything else you guys want to add about personal statement brainstorming or any other pieces of advice you might have for students?
I always say just to have fun with it, use this essay and use your sentences to showcase your personality. If you're funny, write it in a lighthearted way. And there are so many examples out there. I mean, go find a sample essay that has kind of a lighthearted tone to it if that's what you want to match, but really let your sentences and the way you're writing it show your personality. And that's where it just takes time to almost sit in what you want to say, outline it, and then let your sentences, pull your personality out. Um, that's a really hard thing to just say without showing on a podcast, but that's where like finding some examples will probably help a lot.
And we do have a lot of samples on our website. So like on moonprep.com, there's like a resources tab. We have like a whole like essay writing resource that you can definitely check out and see. But yeah, I feel like ultimately starting early is key. One thing I'll also say, I know we talked about getting a second opinion. I think that there's a risk of asking for too many second opinions because I've seen some really great essays get destroyed by them asking their English teacher, and then another student who got into Brown, and then their friends, and then of course their parents, and then like, of course us. And so the essay advice that you get, it could be good, solid advice, but it could just take the essay in like 6 different directions then. And so that's what I always tell kids too. It's like, obviously Michaela is great at her job, Erin is great at her job, Nicole is great at her job. And if you were to ask all 3 of them to give feedback on an essay, they might say different things. And there's nothing wrong with that because essay editing is subjective. So um, I think it's always a good idea to ask a second opinion, but you know, take every piece of advice with a grain of salt and don't ask for too many people's advice, because and try and take everyone's advice too, because then you could very well like rip apart a really well crafted essay trying to fit everyone's feedback into it. Okay, so I think that's it for us today. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the White Coat Club. Don't forget to like and subscribe to get more content, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks with a new episode.